Good morning, class. When we last left off, Faber had given Montag a seashell radio, which is like our modern day Bluetooth, and he gave it to him so that when he went and talked to Beatty, Faber could hear what Beatty was saying through the Bluetooth, and then Faber could tell Montag what to say to Beatty so that Beatty wouldn't convince Montag to continue burning books and continue being a fireman. So let's continue. You could feel the war getting ready in the sky that night, the way the clouds moved aside and came back, and the way the stars looked, a million of them swimming between the clouds like the enemy discs, and the feeling that the sky might fall upon the city and turn it to chalk dust, and the moon go up in red fire. That was how the night felt. Montag walked from the subway with the money in his pocket. He had visited the bank, which was open all night and every night with robot tellers in attendance. As he walked, he was listening to the seashell radio in one car. We have mobilized 1,000,000 men. Quick victory is ours if the war comes. Music flooded over the voice quickly, and it was gone. 10,000,000 men mobilized, Faber's voice whispered in his other ear. But say 1,000,000, it's happier. Faber? Yes? I'm not thinking. I'm just doing like I'm told, like always. You said get the money, and I got it. I didn't really think of it myself. When do I start working things out on my own? You've started already. By saying what you just said, you'll have to take me on faith. I took the others on faith, yes, and look where we're headed. You'll have to travel blind for a while. Here's my arm to hold on to. I don't want to change sides and just be told what to do. There's no reason to change if I do that. You're wise already. Montag felt his feet moving him on the sidewalk toward his house. Keep talking. Would you like me to read? I'll read so you can remember. I go to bed only 5 hours a night. Nothing to do. So if you like, I'll read you to sleep nights. They say you retain knowledge even when you're sleeping, if someone whispers it in your ear. Yes. Here, far away, across town in the night, the faintest whisper of a turned page. The book of Job. The moon rose in the sky as Montag walked, his lips moving just a trifle. He was eating a light supper at 9 in the evening when the front door cried out in the hall, and Mildred ran from the parlor like a native fleeing an eruption of Vesuvius. Mrs. Phelps and Mrs. Bowles came through the front door and vanished into the volcano's mouth with martinis in their hands. Montag stopped eating. They were like a monstrous crystal chandelier, tinkling in 1,000 chimes. He saw their Cheshire cat's smiles burning through the walls of the house, and now they were screaming at each other above the din. Montag found himself at the parlor door with his food still in his mouth. Doesn't everyone look nice? Nice. You look fine, Millie. Fine. Everyone looks swell. Swell. Montag stood watching them. Patience, whispered Faber. I shouldn't be here, whispered Montag almost to himself. I should be on my way back to you with the money. Tomorrow's time enough. Careful. Isn't the show wonderful? Cried Mildred. Wonderful. On one wall, a woman smiled and drank orange juice simultaneously. How does she do both at once? Thought Montag insanely. In the other walls, an X-ray of the same woman revealed the contracting journey of the refreshing beverage on its way to her delightful stomach. Abruptly, the room took off on a rocket flight into the clouds. It plunged into a lime-green sea where blue fish ate red and yellow fish. A minute later, 3 white cartoon clowns chopped off each other's limbs to the accompaniment of immense incoming tides of laughter. 2 minutes more, and the room whipped out of town to the jet cars wildly circling an arena, bashing and backing up and bashing each other again. Montag saw a number of bodies fly in the air. Millie, did you see that? I saw it. Montag reached inside the parlor wall and pulled the main switch. The images drained away, as if the water had been let out from a gigantic crystal bowl of hysterical fish. The 3 women turned slowly and looked with unconcealed irritation and then dislike at Montag. When do you suppose the war will start? He said. I notice your husbands aren't here tonight. Oh, they come and go, said Mrs. Phelps. In again, out again, Finnegan. The army called Pete yesterday. He'll be back next week. The army said so. Quick war. 48 hours, they said, and everyone home. That's what the Army said. Quick war. Pete was called yesterday, and they said he'd be back next week. Quick. The three women fidgeted and looked nervously at the empty, mud-colored walls. I'm not worried, said Mrs. Phelps. I'll let Pete do all the worrying, she giggled. I'll let old Pete do all the worrying, not me. I'm not worried. It's always someone else's husband's dies, they say. I've heard that too. I've never known any dead man killed in a war. Killed jumping off buildings, yes, like Gloria's husband last week. But from wars, no. Not from war, said Mrs. Phelps. Anyway, Pete and I always said no tears, nothing like that. It's our third marriage each, and we're independent. Be independent, we always said. He said, if I get killed off, you just go right ahead and don't cry. But get married again, and don't think of me. That reminds me, said Mildred. Did you see that Clara Dove 5-minute romance last night in your wall? Well, it was all about this woman who... Montague said nothing, but stood looking at the women's faces as he had once looked at the faces of saints in a strange church he had entered when he was a child. The faces of those enameled creatures meant nothing to him, though he talked to them and stood in that church for a long time, trying to be of that religion, trying to know what that religion was, trying to get enough of the raw incense and special dust of the place into his lungs, and thus into his blood to feel touched and concerned by the meaning of the colorful men and women with the porcelain eyes and the blood-ruby lips. But there was nothing. It was a stroll through another store, and his currency strange and unusable there, and his passion cold even when he touched the wood and plaster and clay. So it was now in his own parlor, with these women twisting in their chairs under his gaze, lighting cigarettes, blowing smoke, touching their sun-fired hair, and examining their blazing fingernails as if they had caught fire from his looks. Their faces grew haunted with silence. They leaned forward at the sound of Montague swallowing his final bit of food. They listened to his feverish breathing. The three empty walls of the room were like the pale brows of sleeping giants now, empty of dreams. Montague felt that if you touched these three staring brows, you would feel a fine salt sweat on your fingertips. The perspiration gathered with the silence and the sub-audible trembling around and about, and in the women who were burning with tension. Any moment they might hiss a long, sputtering hiss and explode. Montague moved his lips. Let's talk. The women jerked and stared. How are your children, Mrs. Phelps? He asked. You know I haven't anyone. No one in his right mind, the good Lord knows, would have children, said Mrs. Phelps, not quite sure why she was angry with this man. I wouldn't say that, said Mrs. Bowles. I've had 2 children by cesarean section. No use going through all that agony for a baby. The world must reproduce, you know. The race must go on. Besides, they sometimes look just like you, and that's nice. 2 cesareans tamed the trick. Yes, sir. Oh, my doctor said cesareans aren't necessary. You've got the hips for it. Everything's normal, but I insisted. Cesareans are not. Children are ruinous. You're out of your mind, said Mrs. Phelps. I pluck the children in school 9 days out of 10. I put up with them when they come home 3 days a month. It's not bad at all. You heave them into the parlor and turn the switch. It's like washing clothes. Stuff laundry in and slam the lid, Mrs. Bowles tittered. They just as soon kick as kiss me. Thank God I can kick back. The women showed their tongues, laughing. Mildred sat a moment and then, seeing that Montague was still in the doorway, clapped her hands. Let's talk politics, to please Guy. Sounds fine, said Mrs. Bowles. I voted last election, same as everyone, and I laid it on the line for President Noble. I think he's one of the nicest looking men who ever became president. Oh, but the man they ran against him? He wasn't much, was he? Kind of small and homely, and he didn't shave too close or comb his hair very well. What possessed the outs to run him? You just don't go running a little short man like that against a tall man. Besides, he mumbled. Half the time I couldn't hear a word he said, and the words I did hear, I didn't understand. Fat, too, and didn't dress to hide it. No wonder the landslide was for Winston Noble. Even their names helped. Compare Winston Noble to Hubert Hogue for 10 seconds, and you can almost figure the results. Damn it, cried Montague. What do you know about Hogue and Noble? Why, they were right in that parlor wall not 6 months ago. One was always picking his nose. It drove me wild. Well, Mr. Montague, said Mrs. Phelps, do you want us to vote for a man like that? Mildred beamed. You just run away from the door, Guy, and don't make us nervous. But Montague was gone and back in a moment with a book in his hand. Guy! Damn it all! Damn it all! Damn it! What have you got there? Isn't that a book? I thought that all special training these days was done by film, Mrs. Phelps blinked. You reading up on fireman theory? Theory, hell, said Montague. It's poetry. Montague, a whisper. Leave me alone, Montague felt himself turning in, a great circling roar and buzz and hum. Montague, hold on. Don't. Did you hear them? Did you hear these monsters talking about monsters? Oh, God, the way they jabber about people and their own children and themselves, and the way they talk about their husbands, and the way they talk about war, damn it. I stand here and I can't believe it. I didn't say a single word about any war, I'll have you know, said Mrs. Phelps. As for poetry, I hate it, said Mrs. Bowles. Have you ever read any? Montague, Favor's voice scraped away at him. You'll ruin everything. Shut up, you fool. All three women were on their feet. Sit down. They sat. I'm going home, quavered Mrs. Bowles. Montague, please, in the name of God, what are you up to? Pleaded Favor. Why don't you just read us one of those poems from your little book? Mrs. Phelps nodded. I think that'd be very interesting. That's not right, wailed Mrs. Bowles. We can't do that. Well, look at Mr. Montague. He wants to. I know he does. And if we listen nice, Mr. Montague will be happy, and then maybe we can go on and do something else. She glanced nervously at the long emptiness of the walls and closing them. Montague, go through with this, and I'll cut off. I'll leave. The beetle jabbed his ear. What good is this? What'll you prove? Scare hell out of 'em, that's what. Scare the living daylights out. Mildred looked at the empty air. Now, Guy, just who are you talking to? A silver needle pierced his brain. Montague, listen. Only one way out. Play it as a joke. Cover up. Pretend you aren't mad at all. Then walk to your raw incinerator and throw the book in. Mildred had already anticipated this in a quavery voice. Ladies, once a year, every fireman's allowed to bring one book home from the old days to show his family how silly it all was, how nervous that sort of thing can make you, how crazy. Guy's surprise tonight is to read you one sample to show how mixed up things were, so none of us will ever have to bother our little old heads about that junk again. Isn't that right, darling? He crushed the books in his fist. Say yes. His mouth moved like Favor's. Yes. Mildred snatched the book with a laugh. Here, read this one. No, I take it back. Here's that funny one you read out loud today. Ladies, you won't understand a word. It goes umpty-tumpty-ump. Go ahead, Guy. That page, dear. He looked at the open page. A fly stirred its wings softly in his ear. Read. What's the title, dear? Dover Beach. His mouth was numb. Now read in a nice, clear voice and go slow. The room was blazing hot. He was all fire. He was all coldness. They sat in the middle of an empty desert with 3 chairs, and him standing, swaying, and him waiting for Mrs. Phelps to stop straightening her dress hem and Mrs. Bowles to take her fingers away from her hair. Then he began to read in a low, stumbling voice that grew firmer as he progressed from line to line. And his voice went out across the desert into the whiteness and around the 3 sitting women there in the great hot emptiness. The sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast edges, drear and naked shingles of the world. The chairs creaked under the 3 women. Montague finished it out. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy nor love nor light, nor certitude nor peace nor help for pain. And we are here on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Mrs. Phelps was crying. The others in the middle of the desert watched her crying grow very loud as her face squeezed itself out of shape. They sat, not touching her, bewildered by her display. She sobbed uncontrollably. Montague himself was stunned and shaken. Shh, shh, said Mildred. You're all right, Clara. Now, Clara, snap out of it. Clara, what's wrong? I, sobbed Mrs. Fells. Don't know. Don't know. I just don't know. Oh. Mrs. Bowles stood up and glared at Montague. You see, I knew it. That's what I wanted to prove. I knew it would happen. I've always said poetry and tears, poetry and suicide and crying and awful feelings, poetry and sickness, all that mush. Now I've had it proved to me. You're nasty, Montague. Mr. Montague, you're nasty, Faber said. Now. Montague felt himself turn and walk to the wall slot and drop the book in through the brass notch to the waiting flames. Silly words, silly, awful, hurting words, said Mrs. Bowles. Why do people want to hurt people? Not enough hurt in the world you've got to tease people with stuff like that? Clara, now Clara, begged Mildred, pulling her arm. Come on, let's be cheery. You turn the family on now. Go ahead, let's laugh and be happy. Now stop crying. We'll have a party. No, said Mrs. Bowles. I'm trotting right straight home. You want to visit my house and family, well and good. But I won't come in this fireman's crazy house again in my lifetime. Go home. Montague fixed his eyes upon her quietly. Go home and think of your first husband divorced, and your second husband killed in a jet, and your third husband blowing his brains out. Go home and think of the dozen abortions you've had. Go home and think of that and your damn cesarean sections too, and your children who hate your guts. Go home and think how it has all happened, and what did you ever do to stop it? Go home, he yelled, before I knock you down and kick you out the door. Doors slammed and the house was empty. Montague stood alone in the winter weather with the parlor walls the color of dirty snow. In the bathroom, water ran. He heard Mildred shake the sleeping tablets into her hand. Fool, Montague, fool. Oh, God, you silly fool. Shut up. He pulled the green bullet from his ears and jammed it into his pocket. It sizzled faintly. Fool. He searched the house and found the books where Mildred had stacked them behind the refrigerator. Some were missing, and he knew that she had started on her own slow process of dispersing the dynamite in her house, stick by stick. But he was not angry now, only exhausted and bewildered with himself. He carried the books into the backyard and hid them in the bushes near the alley fence. For tonight only, he thought, in case she decides to do any more burning. He went back through the house. Mildred? He called to the door of the darkened bedroom. There was no sound. Outside, crossing the lawn on his way to work, he tried not to see how completely dark and deserted Clarice McClellan's house was. On the way downtown, he was completely alone with his terrible error that he felt the necessity for the strange warmness and goodness that came from a familiar and gentle voice speaking in the night. Already, in a few short hours, it seemed that he had known Faber a lifetime. Now he knew that he was two people, that he was above all Montague, who knew nothing, who did not even know himself, a fool, but only suspected it. And he knew that he was also the old man who talked to him, and talked to him as the train was sucked from one end of the night city to the other on one light, long, sickening gasp of motion. In the days to follow, in the nights when there was no moon, and in the nights where there was a very bright moon shining on the earth, the old man would go on with his talking, and this talking, drop by drop, stone by stone, flake by flake. His mind would well over at last, and he would not be Montague any more. This the old man told him, assured him, promised him. He would be Montague plus Faber, fire plus water, and then, one day, after everything had mixed and simmered and worked away in silence, there would be neither fire nor water, but wine. Out of two separate and opposite things, a third. And one day he would look back upon the fool and know the fool. Even now he could feel the start of the long journey, the leave-taking, the going away from the self he had been. It was good listening to the beetle hum, the sleepy mosquito buzz and delicate filigree murmur of the old man's voice, at first scolding him and then consoling him in the late hour of night as he emerged from the steaming subway toward the firehouse world. Pity, Montague, pity. Don't haggle and nag them. You were so recently of them yourself. They're so confident they will run on forever, but they won't run on. They don't know that this is all one huge, big, blazing meteor that makes a pretty fire in space, but that someday it'll have to hit. They see only the blaze, the pretty fire as you saw it. Montag, old men who stay at home afraid, tending their peanut brittle bones, have no right to criticize. Yet you almost killed things at the start. Watch it. I'm with you, remember that. I understand how it happened. I must admit that your blind raging invigorated me. God, how young I felt. But now I want you to feel old. I want a little of my cowardice to be distilled in you tonight. The next few hours, when you see Captain Beatty, tiptoe round him. Let me hear him for you. Let me feel the situation out. Survival is our ticket. Forget the poor, silly women. I made them unhappier than they have been in years, I think, said Montag. It shocked me to see Mrs. Phelps cry. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's best not to face things, to run, have fun. I don't know. I feel guilty. No, you mustn't. If there were no war, if there was peace in the world, I'd say, fine, have fun. But Montag, you mustn't go back to being just a fireman. All isn't well with the world. Montag perspired. Montag, you listening? My feet, said Montag. I can't move them. I feel so damn silly. My feet won't move. Listen, easy now, said the old man gently. I know. You're afraid of making mistakes. Don't be. Mistakes can be profited by. Man, when I was young, I shoved my ignorance in people's faces. They beat me with sticks. By the time I was 40, my blunt instrument had been honed to a fine cutting point for me. If you hide your ignorance, no one will hit you and you'll never learn. Now pick up your feet, into the firehouse with you. We're twins. We're not alone anymore. We're not separated out in different parlors with no contact between. If you need help when Beatty pries at you, I'll be sitting right here in your eardrum making notes. Montag felt his right foot, then his left foot move. Old man, he said, stay with me. The mechanical hound was gone. Its kennel was empty, and the firehouse stood all about in plaster silence. And the orange salamander slept with its kerosene in its belly, and the fire throwers crossed upon its flanks. And Montag came in through the silence and touched the brass pole and slid up in the dark air, looking back at the deserted kennel, his heart beating, pausing, beating. Faber was a gray moth asleep in his ear for the moment. Beatty stood near the drop hole waiting, but with his back turned as if he were not waiting. Well, he said to the men playing cards, here comes a very strange beast, which in all tongues is called a fool. He put his hand to one side, palm up for a gift. Montag put the book in it. Without even glancing at the title, Beatty tossed the book into the trash basket and lit a cigarette. Who are a little wise, the best fools be. Welcome back, Montag. I hope you'll be staying with us, now that your fever is done and your sickness is over. Sit in for a hand of poker? They sat and the cards were dealt. In Beatty's sight, Montag felt the guilt of his hands. His fingers were like ferrets that had done some evil and now never rested, always stirred and picked and hid in pockets, moving from under Beatty's alcohol-flamed stare. If Beatty so much as breathed on them, Montag felt his hands might wither, turn over on their sides, and never be shocked to life again. They would be buried the rest of his life in his coat sleeves, forgotten. For these were the hands that had acted on their own, no part of him. Here was where the conscience first manifested itself to snatch books, dart off with Job and Ruth and Willie Shakespeare, and now in the firehouse these hands seemed gloved with blood. Twice in half an hour Montag had to rise from the game and go to the latrine to wash his hands. When he came back, he hid his hands under the table. Beatty laughed. Let's have your hands in sight, Montag. Not that we don't trust you, understand, but they all laughed. Well, said Beatty, the crisis is past and all is well. The sheep returns to the fold. We're all sheep who have strayed at times. Truth is truth. To the end of reckoning, we've cried. They are never alone that are accompanied with noble thoughts. We've shouted to ourselves. Sweet food of sweetly uttered knowledge, Sir Philip Sidney said. But on the other hand, words are like leaves, and where they most abound, much fruit of sense beneath is rarely found. Alexander Pope. What do you think of that? I don't know. Careful, whispered Faber, living in another world far away. Or this, a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the Pierian well. Spring, their shallow draughts intoxicate the brain, and drinking largely sobers us again. Pope, same essay. Where does that put you? Montague bit his lip. I'll tell you, said Beatty, smiling at his cards. That made you for a little while a drunkard. Read a few lines and off you go over the cliff. Bang, you're ready to blow up the world, chop off heads, knock down women and children, destroy authority. I know, I've been through it all. I'm all right, said Montague nervously. Stop blushing. I'm not needling, really I'm not. Do you know I had a dream an hour ago? I lay down for a cat nap, and in this dream you and I, Montague, got into a furious debate on books. You towered with rage, yelled quotes at me. I calmly parried every thrust. Power, I said. And you, quoting Dr. Johnson, said, knowledge is more than equivalent to force. And I said, well, Dr. Johnson also said, dear boy, that he is no wise man that will quit a certainty for an uncertainty. Stick with the fireman, Montague. All else is dreary chaos. Don't listen, whispered Faber. He's trying to confuse. He's slippery. Watch out. Beatty chuckled. And you said, quoting, truth will come to light, murder will not be hid long. And I cried in good humor, oh God, he speaks only of his horse, and the devil can cite scripture for his purpose. And you yelled, this age thinks better of a gilded fool than of a threadbare saint in wisdom's school. And I whispered gently, the dignity of truth is lost with much protesting. And you screamed, carcasses bleed at the sight of the murderer. And I said, patting your hand, what do I give you, trench mouth? And you shrieked, knowledge is power, and a dwarf on a giant's shoulders are the furthest of the two. And I summed my sight up with rare serenity in the folly of mistaking a metaphor for a proof, a torrent of verbiage for a spring of capital truths, and oneself as an oracle is inborn in us, Mr. Valery once said. Montague's head swirled sickeningly. He felt beaten unmercifully on brow, eyes, nose, lips, chin, on shoulders, on up-flailing arms. He wanted to yell, no, shut up, you're confusing things, stop it. Beatty's graceful fingers thrust out to seize his wrist. God, what a pulse! I've got you going, have I, Montague? Jesus, God, your pulse sounds like the day after the war. Everything but sirens and bells. Shall I talk some more? I like your look of panic. Swahili, Indian, English lit. I speak them all. A kind of excellent dumb discourse, Willie. Montague, hold on. The moth brushed Montague's ear. He's muddying the waters. Oh, you were scared silly, said Beatty, for I was doing a terrible thing and using the very books you clung to rebut you on every hand, on every point. What traitors books can be. You think they're backing you up and they turn on you. Others can use them too, and there you are, lost in the middle of the moor, in a great welter of nouns and verbs and adjectives. At the very end of my dream, along I came with a salamander and said, going my way? And you got in and we drove back to the firehouse in beatific silence. All dwindled away to peace. Beatty, let Montague's wrist go. Let the hand slump limply on the table. All is well that is well in the end. Silence. Montague sat like a carved white stone. The echo of the final hammer on his skull died slowly away into the black cavern where Faber waited for the echoes to subside. And then, when the startled dust had settled down about Montague's mind, Faber began softly. All right, he's had his say. You must take it in. I'll say my say too in the next few hours, and you'll take it in, and you'll try to judge them and make your decision as to which way to jump or fall. But I want it to be your decision, not mine, and not the captain's. But remember that the captain belongs to the most dangerous enemy of truth and freedom, the solid, unmoving cattle of the majority. Oh God, the terrible tyranny of the majority. We all have our harps to play, and it's up to you now to know with which ear you'll listen. Montague opened his mouth to answer Faber, and was saved this error in the presence of other when the station bell rang. The alarm voice in the ceiling chanted, There was a tacking sound as the alarm report telephone typed out the address across the room. Captain Beatty, his poker cards in one pink hand, walked with exaggerated slowness to the phone and ripped out the address when the report was finished. He glanced perfunctorily at it and shoved it in his pocket. He came back and sat down. The others looked at him. "It can wait exactly 40 seconds while I take all the money away from you," said Beatty happily. Montague put his cards down. "Tired, Montague? Going out of this game?" "Yes." "Hold on. Well, come to think of it, we can finish this hand later. Just leave your cards face down and hustle the equipment. On the double now." And Beatty rose up again. "Montague, you don't look well. I'd hate to think you were coming down with another fever." "I'll be all right." "You'll be fine. This is a special case. Come on, jump for it." They leaped into the air and clutched the brass pole as if it were the last vantage point above a tidal wave passing below, and then the brass pole, to their dismay, slid them down into darkness, into the blast and cough and suction of the gaseous dragon roaring to life. "Hey!" They rounded a corner and thunder and siren, with concussion of tires, with scream of rubber, with a shift of kerosene bolt in the glittery brass tank, like the food in the stomach of a giant, with Montague's fingers jolting over the silver rail, swinging into cold space, with the wind tearing his hair back from his head, and the wind whistling in his teeth, and him all the while thinking of the woman, the chafe woman in her parlor tonight, and the kernels blown out from under them by a neon wind, and his silly damned reading of a book to them. How like trying to put out fires with water pistols. How senseless and insane. One rage turned in for another, one anger displacing another. When would he stop being entirely mad and be quiet? Be very quiet indeed. "Here we go." Montague looked up. Beatty never drove, but he was driving tonight, slamming the salamander around corners, leaning forward high on the driver's throne, his massive black slicker flapping out behind, so that he seemed a great black bat flying above the engine, over the brass numbers, taking the full wind. "Here we go to keep the world happy, Montague." Beatty's pink phosphorus cheeks glimmered in the high darkness, and he was smiling furiously. "Here we are." The salamander boomed to a halt, throwing men off in slips and clumsy hops. Montague stood, fixing his raw eyes to the cold, bright rail under his clenched fingers. "I can't do it," he thought. "How can I go at this new assignment? How can I go on burning things? I can't go in this place." Beatty, smelling of the wind through which he had rushed, was at Montague's elbow. "All right, Montague?" The man ran like cripples in their clumsy boots, as quietly as spiders. At last Montague raised his eyes and turned. Beatty was watching his face. "Something the matter, Montague?" "Why," said Montague slowly, "we've stopped in front of my house." Part 3, Burning Bright. Lights flicked on and the house doors opened all down the street to watch the carnival set up. Montague and Beatty stared, one with dry satisfaction, the other with disbelief, at the house before them, this main ring in which torches would be juggled and fire eaten. "Well," said Beatty, "now you did it. Old Montague wanted to fly near the sun, and now he's burnt his damned wings. He wonders why. Didn't I hit enough when I set the hound around your place?" Montague's face was entirely numb and featureless. He felt his head turn like a stone carving to the dark place next door, set in its bright borders of flowers. Beatty snorted. "Oh, no, you weren't fooled by that little idiot's routine now, were you? Flowers, butterflies, leaves, sunsets. Oh, hell. It's all in her file. I'll be damned, I've hit the bullseye. Look at the sick look on your face. A few grass blades and the quarters of the moon? What trash! What good did she ever do with all that?" Montague sat on the cold fender of the Dragon, moving his head half an inch to the left, half an inch to the right, left, right, left, right, left. She saw everything. She didn't do anything to anyone. She just let them alone. Alone? Hell! She chewed around you, didn't she? One of those damn do-gooders with their shocked, holier-than-thou silences, their one talent making others feel guilty. God damn, they rise like the midnight sun to sweat you in your bed. The front door opened. Mildred came down the steps, running, one suitcase held with a dreamlike, quenching rigidity in her fist, as a beetle taxi hissed to the curb. Mildred! She ran past with her body stiff, her face floured with powder, her mouth gone without lipstick. Mildred, you didn't put in the alarm. She shoved the valise in the waiting beetle, climbed in, and sat mumbling. Poor family, poor family. Oh, everything gone, everything gone now. Beatty grabbed Montag's shoulder as the beetle blasted away and hit 70 miles an hour far down the street. Gone. There was a crash like the falling parts of a dream, fashioned out of warped glass, mirrors, and crystal prisms. Montag drifted about as if another incomprehensible storm had turned him to see Stoneman and Black wielding axes, shattering window panes to provide cross-ventilation. The brush of a death's head moth against a cold black screen. Montag, this is Faber. Do you hear me? What is happening? This is happening to me, said Montag. What a dreadful surprise, said Beatty, for everyone nowadays knows absolutely is certain that nothing will ever happen to me. Others die. I go on. There are no consequences and no responsibilities, except that there are. But let's not talk about them, eh? By the time the consequences catch up with you, it's too late, isn't it, Montag? Montag, can you get away? Run? Asked Faber. Montag walked, but did not feel his feet touch the cement, and then the night grasses. Beatty flicked his igniter nearby, and the small orange flame drew his fascinated gaze. What is there about the fire that's so lovely? No matter what age we are, what draws us to it? Beatty blew out the flame and lit it again. It's perpetual motion, the thing man wanted to invent but never did, or almost perpetual motion. If you let it go on, it'd burn out lifetimes out. What is fire? It's a mystery. Scientists give us gobbledygook about friction and molecules, but they don't really know. Its real beauty is that it destroys responsibility and consequences. A problem gets too burdensome, then into the furnace with it. Now, Montag, you're a burden, and fire will lift you off my shoulders. Clean, quick, sure, nothing to rot later. Antibiotic, aesthetic, practical. Montag stood looking in now at this queer house, made strange by the hour of the night, by murmuring neighbor voices, by littered glass, and there on the floor, their covers torn off and spilled like swan feathers, the incredible books that looked so silly and really not worth bothering with, for these were nothing but black type and yellowed paper and raveled binding. Mildred, of course. She must have watched him hide the books in the garden and brought them back in. Mildred. I want you to do this job all by your lonesome, Montag. Not with kerosene and a match, but piecework with a flamethrower. Your house, you clean up. Montag, can't you run? Get away? No, cried Montag helplessly. The hound, because of the hound. Faber heard, and Beatty, thinking it was meant for him, heard. Yes, the hound's somewhere about the neighborhood, so don't try anything. Ready? Ready. Montag snapped the safety catch on the flamethrower. Fire! A great nuzzling gout of flame leapt out to lap at the books and knock them against the wall. He stepped into the bedroom and fired twice, and the twin beds went up in a great simmering whisper, with more heat and passion and light than he would have supposed them to contain. He burnt the bedroom walls and the cosmetics chest because he wanted to change everything. The chairs, the tables, and in the dining room, the silverware and plastic dishes. Everything that showed that he had lived here in this empty house with a strange woman who would forget him tomorrow, who had gone and quite forgotten him already, listening to her seashell radio pour in on her, and in on her as she rode across town alone. And as before, it was good to burn. He felt himself gush out in the fire, snatch, rend, rip in half with flame, and put away the senseless problem. If there was no solution, well then now there was no problem either. Fire was best for everything. The books, Montag. The books leapt and danced like roasted birds, their wings ablaze with red and yellow feathers. And then he came to the parlor where the great idiot monsters lay asleep with their white thoughts and their snowy dreams, and he shot a bolt at each of the 3 blank walls. And the vacuum hissed out at him. The emptiness made an even emptier whistle, a senseless scream. He tried to think about the vacuum upon which the nothingness had performed, but he could not. He held his breath so the vacuum could not get into his lungs. He cut off its terrible emptiness, drew back, and gave the entire room a gift of one huge, bright yellow flower of burning. The fireproof plastic sheath on everything was cut wide, and the house began to shudder with flame. "When you're quite finished," said Beatty behind him, "you're under arrest." The house fell in red coals and black ash. It bedded itself down in sleepy, pink, gray cinders, and a smoke plume blew over it, rising and waving slowly back and forth in the sky. It was 3:30 in the morning. The crowd drew back into the houses. The great tents of the circus had slumped into charcoal and rubble, and the show was well over. Montague stood with the flamethrower in his limp hands, great islands of perspiration drenching his armpits, his face smeared with soot. The other firemen waited behind him in the darkness, their faces illuminated faintly by the smoldering foundation. Montague started to speak twice, and then finally managed to put his thought together. "Was it my wife turned in the alarm?" Beatty nodded. "But her friends turned in an alarm earlier, that I let ride. One way or the other, you'd have got it. It was pretty silly quoting poetry around free and easy like that. It was the act of a silly damn snob. Give a man a few lines of verse and he thinks he's the lord of all creation. You think you can walk on water with your books? Well, the world can get by just fine without them. Look where they got you, in slime up to your lip. If I stir the slime with my little finger, you'll drown." Montague could not move. A great earthquake had come with fire and leveled the house, and Mildred was under there somewhere, and his entire life under there, and he could not move. The earthquake was still shaking and falling and shivering inside him, and he stood there, his knees half bent under the great load of tiredness and bewilderness and outrage, letting Beatty hit him without raising a hand. "Montague, you idiot. Montague, you damn fool. Why did you really do it?" Montague did not hear. He was far away. He was running with his mind. He was gone, leaving this dead, soot-covered body to sway in front of another raving fool. "Montague, get out of there," said Faber. Montague listened. Beatty struck him a blow on the head that sent him reeling back. The green bullet, in which Faber's voice whispered and cried, fell to the sidewalk. Beatty snatched it up, grinning. He held it half in, half out of his ear. Montague heard the distant voice calling, "Montague, you all right?" Beatty switched the green bullet off and thrust it in his pocket. "Well, so there's more here than I thought. I saw you tilt your head listening. First I thought you had a seashell, but when you turned clever later, I wondered. We'll trace this and drop in on your friend." "No," said Montague. He twitched the safety catch on the flamethrower. Beatty glanced instantly at Montague's fingers, and his eyes widened to the faintest bit. Montague saw the surprise there, and himself glanced to his hands to see what new thing they had done. Thinking back later, he could never decide whether the hands or Beatty's reaction to the hands gave him the final push toward murder. The last rolling thunder of the avalanche stoned down about his ears, not touching him. Beatty grinned his most charming grin. "Well, that's one way to get an audience. Hold a gun on a man and force him to listen to your speech. Speech away. What'll it be this time? Why don't you belt Shakespeare at me, you fumbling snob? There is no terror, Cassius, in your threats, for I am armed so strong in honesty that they pass by me as an idle wind which I respect not. How's that? Go ahead now, you second-hand literature. Pull the trigger." He took one step toward Montague. Montague only said, "We never burned right." "Hand it over, guy," said Beatty with a fixed smile. And then he was a shrieking blaze, a jumping, sprawling, gibbering mannequin, no longer human or known, all writhing flame on the lawn as Montague shot one continuous pulse of liquid fire on him. There was a hiss like a great mouthful of spittle, banging a red-hot stove, a bubbling and frothing as if salt had been poured over a monstrous black snail to cause a terrible liquefaction, and a boiling over of yellow foam. Montague shut his eyes, shouted, and fought to get his hands at his ears to clamp and to cut away the sound. Beatty flopped over and over and at last twisted in on himself like a charred wax doll and lay silent. The other firemen did not move. Montag kept his sickness down long enough to aim the flamethrower. Turn around! They turned, their faces like blanched meat, streaming sweat. He beat their heads, knocking off their helmets and bringing them down on themselves. They fell and lay without moving. The blowing of a single autumn leaf. He turned, and the mechanical hound was there. It was half across the lawn, coming from the shadows, moving with such drifting ease that it was like a single solid cloud of black-gray smoke blown at him in silence. It made a single last leap into the air, coming down at Montag from a good 3 feet over his head, its spidered legs reaching, the procaine needle snapping out its single angry tooth. Montag caught it with a bloom of fire, a single wondrous bloom that curled in petals of yellow and blue and orange about the metal dog, clad it in a new covering as it slammed into Montag and threw him 10 feet back against the bole of a tree, taking the flame gun with him. He felt it scrabble and seize his leg and stab the needle in for a moment before the fire snapped the hound up in the air, burst its metal bones at the joints, and blew out its interior in the single flushing of red color, like a skyrocket fastened to the street. Montag lay watching the dead alive thing fiddle the air and die. Even now it seemed to want to get back at him and finish the injection which was now working through the flesh of his leg. He felt all the mingled relief and horror of having pulled back only in time to have just his knee slammed by the fender of a car hurtling by at 90 miles an hour. He was afraid to get up, afraid he might not be able to gain his feet at all with an anesthetized leg. A numbness and a numbness hollowed into a numbness. And now, the street empty, the house burnt like an ancient bit of stage scenery, the other homes dark, the hound here, Beatty there, the 3 other firemen another place, and the salamander. He gazed at the immense engine. That would have to go too. Well, he thought, let's see how badly off you are. On your feet now. Easy, easy. There. He stood, and he had only one leg. The other was like a chunk of burnt pine log he was carrying along as a penance for some obscure sin. When he put his weight on it, a shower of silver needles gushed up the length of the calf and went off in the knee. He wept. Come on, you can't stay here. A few house lights were going on again down the street, whether from the incidents just past or because the abnormal silence following the fight. Montag did not know. He hobbled around the ruins, seizing at his bad leg when it lagged, talking and whimpering and shouting details at it, and cursing it and pleading with it to work for him now when it was vital. He heard a number of people crying out in the darkness and shouting. He reached the backyard and the alley. Beatty, he thought, you're not a problem now. You always said, don't face a problem, burn it. Well, now I've done both. Goodbye, Captain. And he stumbled along the alley in the dark.